He saved soldiers under fire, but ended up homeless and unwanted. His diagnosis was falsified so that his treatment would not be paid for, and he had to sell his medals to buy food. When he dared to tell the truth, he was arrested at the memorial. A true hero was expelled by the system he had defended his entire life. Unjust, or just? If it feels wrong to you, write down your opinion in the comments. The hospital smelled of bleach and disappointment. Dr. Nathaniel Briggs, age 71, sat hunched on the hard plastic bench outside the VA examination room. His coat was too large for his frame, swallowed in the shoulders but clinging to his arms like molted skin. He'd sewn it himself from an old wool blanket. The receptionist had looked at it with pity. Or maybe disdain. These days, it was hard to tell the difference. Inside his coat pocket was a folded letter from the VA, summoning him for a routine checkup after missing several appointments. They had no idea he'd been living out of a church basement 3 towns away, with no working phone, no mailbox, and no means of transportation except his aching knees. He stared at the scuffed floor tiles and thought about the shoebox. It was back at the basement, wrapped in an old undershirt. Inside were 3 medals, a rusted compass, and laminated clippings from newspapers long out of print. Headlines like, "Combat Surgeon Pulls 5 from Blast Zone," and, "Hero Doctor Saves Platoon in Ambush." His face looked younger in those grainy photos, stronger, upright, whole. Now, his spine curved like a question mark. And he had more metal in his knees than the medals in that box. "Mr. Briggs," the nurse called. He entered the exam room slowly, dragging his right foot. The young doctor didn't bother looking up until Nathaniel sat down. After 15 minutes of blood pressure readings and perfunctory questions, the doctor pulled up his file on a dusty monitor. His fingers paused over the keyboard. "Strange," he muttered. "What is?" "Your previous diagnosis, it says stage 2 prostate cancer. But the new scans are clean." Nathaniel blinked. "That's not possible." The doctor frowned. "Well, there's a note here that your file was amended last year. That the cancer wasn't advanced enough to require chemo. Treatment was withheld." Withheld? Nathaniel's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Who made that call?" The doctor shrugged. "Administration. Budget constraints, probably." "Sorry, sir. It happens sometimes." "Happens sometimes." As if falsifying a diagnosis was just another clerical error, like getting someone's birthday wrong. Briggs rose slowly. He didn't remember walking out of the hospital. He only remembered the taste in his mouth, like rust and cotton, and the growing pressure in his temples. Outside, the wind was sharp, scraping at his exposed knuckles. He walked without knowing where, until he reached the footbridge that crossed over the freeway. He leaned over the rail and watched the cars blur past beneath him. Nobody looking up. Nobody seeing him. Once, he'd been flown into war zones to patch up the broken bodies no one else could save. He'd been the men they called when hope was flickering out. He remembered one night in Kandahar when he worked 21 hours straight after an ambush. Blood had soaked through his uniform. A private tried to thank him between gasps of morphine, and Briggs had said, "Don't thank me. Survive." Now, here he was. Diagnosed. Denied. Discarded. His pension had vanished during a paperwork audit 7 years ago, misfiled, they said. The appeal was denied. Twice. After that, everything unraveled, rent unpaid, car repossessed, friends fading into the fog of time. The system hadn't just failed him. It had scrubbed him clean off the ledger. A life of service. And this was what remained. He reached into his coat and pulled out his VA card. Bent and laminated. He held it up to the wind and then let go. It fluttered briefly before being swallowed by the traffic below. He didn't feel relief. Only space. Space where belief used to be. Nathaniel Briggs clutched a paper cup of lukewarm soup like it was a holy relic. It trembled in his hands, more from exhaustion than cold. The church basement shelter had given him one small portion of split pea, thinner than he remembered even army rations being. But it was something. Something to remind his stomach that he was still alive. That morning, he'd sold the last of his medals. A young man behind the pawn shop counter hadn't even looked up when Nathaniel unwrapped the velvet cloth. The Bronze Star. The Combat Medical Badge. A folded commendation letter with the name of a now-defunct general. The clerk picked through them like trinkets at a flea market. $30, he said. That's worth 10 times that, Nathaniel protested. The clerk shrugged. Not to me. $30. For a lifetime. He took it anyway. He'd meant to spend it carefully. A hot meal. Bus fare to the VA. Maybe some warmer socks. But when the nausea hit halfway down 5th Street, he ducked into a gas station and bought crackers, a banana, and a bottle of antacid. He scarfed them down in a shadowed alley behind the old pharmacy, then sat there for hours, his back against a graffiti-stained wall, watching shadows stretch across the asphalt. Later that week, he returned to the hospital to challenge the diagnosis. They refused to let him pass the lobby. I have an appointment, he insisted. You've been flagged, the security guard said, tapping his radio. Admin said no readmission without a new referral. Sorry. Nathaniel wanted to yell. But instead, he stood frozen in place, breath heavy, heart pounding. The staff moved around him like he wasn't even there. One nurse recognized him but quickly turned away. Embarrassed? Ashamed? He couldn't tell anymore. He walked out into the January air. His feet ached, his ribs pulsed from a lingering cough, and his breath smoked out of him like steam from a broken pipe. He reached into his coat pocket, hoping to find the last banana he saved, only to pull out the wrinkled peel. A man can get used to anything. Hunger. Loneliness. Pain. But being unseen. That was a different kind of starvation. On Friday, he attended a city meeting about veteran housing. Someone had told him they'd be giving out vouchers. He stood in the back of a cold, overlit municipal auditorium, trying to stay awake during the bureaucratic droning. When his turn came to speak, he stepped up to the mic with a worn folder full of denied appeals and misfiled documents. I'm Dr. Nathaniel Briggs. Retired. 29 years of service, combat medical divisions. My records were tampered with. My benefits disappeared. I was told my diagnosis was downgraded to save money. I've come to ask. Sir, someone cut in. This isn't the forum for individual grievances. I'm not here for a grievance, he said, voice tightening. I'm here for a correction. Murmurs rippled through the room. A city staffer whispered something to the councilman. A moment later, security was called again. They escorted him out. Politely. But publicly. Outside, a cameraman filming the event didn't even pan to him. He filmed the speaker inside. Not the men being ushered away. Nathaniel shuffled down the street. He found a quiet bench outside the War Memorial Park, an iron structure surrounded by hedges and flags. He used to sit there every Veterans Day. This time, within 5 minutes, a groundskeeper approached him. Sorry, sir. Can't loiter here. I'm not loitering, Nathaniel said. I fought for this country. Yeah. Lots of people say that. You'll need to move on. He stood, hands trembling. Not from anger. Not even from cold. From absence. Of place. Of voice. Of mattering. He walked away slowly, his silhouette long in the low light, the flags behind him fluttering above names he once knew, carved in stone, while he was fading into air. It started with a name. Nathaniel hadn't meant to return to the memorial. But his feet, out of habit or defiance, brought him there again, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. The benches were empty. The sun hung low, casting long shadows between the bronze plaques and flagpoles. He stood near the center of the granite wall, where the names of decorated veterans from the last 50 years were engraved in gold leaf. And there it was. Call David M. Stratton. For unwavering bravery under fire, 2007. Nathaniel's vision tunneled. Stratton. A name he hadn't heard in over a decade. The last time he'd seen that man, Stratton was cowering behind a broken Humvee, refusing to return fire while a squad of wounded soldiers screamed for extraction. It was Nathaniel who'd pulled 3 men out of that kill zone. Nathaniel, who radioed for air support. Nathaniel, who held one man's intestines in with gauze and prayer. Stratton got the medal. Nathaniel got silence. He hadn't spoken of it. Not once. Not in the after-action report. Not when interviewed. He told himself it was for the unit's morale. That truth, back then, would have destroyed careers, ruined cohesion. So he swallowed it. Buried it. Now that lie had become stone. The rage that surged wasn't loud. It was steady, like a heartbeat in the back of his skull. He reached into his coat and pulled out a red permanent marker, the kind he used to label medical kits. With trembling hands, he stepped forward and wrote, just beneath Stratton's name. Lies live here. The ink bled into the stone. He pulled from his pocket a folded piece of scrap paper, an old prescription note he'd scribbled on the back of. I pulled men from hell that day. He watched. I bled while he ran. This wall honors the wrong men. He taped it beneath the plaque with a piece of torn medical tape. Then he just stood there. People began to notice. A jogger slowed. An older couple whispered. A teenage boy paused mid-phone scroll. Nathaniel didn't move. His coat fluttered in the wind, his shoulders hunched but steady. His face locked in silent defiance. It took 8 minutes for the police to arrive. 2 officers approached. One reached for the note. The other for Nathaniel's arm. Sir, this is vandalism. That plaque is the lie, he replied. My name's not on any wall. But I carried 3 men on mine. They didn't understand. They didn't want to. One of them grabbed his wrist. Nathaniel resisted, not with violence, but with weight. He sank to the ground, slow and heavy, like an old oak falling. As they pulled him up, the teenager who had been watching stepped forward, phone in hand, camera recording. Yo. This guy's a vet, the boy shouted. He's not some criminal. The officers ignored him. But the video would not. By nightfall, the clip had spread, first to a local news group, then a veterans forum, and finally a major social feed. The caption read, Vietnam vet arrested for telling the truth at memorial. People started asking questions. Who was he? What had he written? Why was he so angry? Nathaniel sat in a holding cell in the basement of the city jail, unaware of the digital storm outside. He stared at the blood-red ink staining his fingertips. They'd let him keep the paper scrap. It was still in his coat pocket. For the first time in years, someone looked at him. And this time, they didn't look away. The cell was colder than it needed to be. Nathaniel sat with his back against the wall, eyes closed, replaying that day in Afghanistan over and over again. The sounds never left, shouts through static, the burst of RPGs, the wet gurgle of men trying to breathe through shredded lungs. And then, the silence. The kind of silence that never left your bones. Outside the cell, the world was waking up to a different kind of noise. The video of his arrest had been shared over 30,000 times by morning. It struck a nerve. Veterans commented in droves. I served with guys like him. The system buries us. This could have been my dad. And beneath all the outrage, one quiet question repeated like a pulse, who is this man? That question reached a young journalist named Kyra Lynn, a recent graduate working the night shift for a digital news outlet. She clicked play on the video expecting something sensational. But as she watched Nathaniel stand motionless at the memorial, face lined with fury and grief, she felt something else, shame. Her grandfather had died waiting for a benefits appeal to be processed. A man who'd spent 2 tours fixing helicopters in the jungle, then spent his final days in a motel room with a malfunctioning oxygen tank. She pitched the story to her editor. He shrugged. If you can get him to talk, run it. Meanwhile, Nathaniel had been appointed a public defender, Marcus Hale, a thin, sharp-eyed man who'd grown up in Baltimore and joined law school because his uncle, a Marine amputee, had lost his house over a clerical VA error. You're not the first, Mr. Briggs, Marcus said through the scratched glass of the holding cell. But maybe you'll be the last. I didn't do it for attention, Nathaniel murmured. I know, Marcus said. But attention is finally here. Let's use it. Over the next week, Marcus and Kyra dug through the records. At first, it was like chasing ghosts. Briggs' military file was redacted, spotty, half missing. VA records contradicted themselves. His pension appeal had disappeared in a bureaucratic wormhole, marked incomplete due to insufficient verification of active duty honors. But then came a breakthrough. A retired medic named Jose Martinez responded to Kyra's interview request. "I remember him," he said. "Doc Briggs. Pulled me out of hell when Stratton froze up like a damn mannequin." Kyra blinked. "Colonel Stratton?" "Yeah." He panicked. "Doc saved us. But afterward, Doc said to let it go. We don't tear each other down out there," he told me. One by one, others came forward, men and women who remembered Briggs patching up field injuries with ingenuity and grit, who recalled his calm under fire, his silence in the face of injustice. Kyra ran the headline. "The hero who took the fall, why Dr. Nathaniel Briggs let a coward take the medal." The story exploded. News networks reached out. Veterans held signs outside the courthouse. Law students started a petition. The VA issued a statement promising to review the case with urgency. The mayor's office offered a formal apology if wrongdoing is found. And still, Nathaniel said little. "I didn't want a parade," he told Kyra, finally agreeing to one interview. "I just didn't want the truth buried with me." She asked why he stayed silent all those years. He looked down at his hands. The same hands that had once held trembling lives together in the sand. The same hands that had reached into chests and bellies, steady as a surgeon's, gentle as a father's. "Because back then," he said, "I thought silence was strength. Turns out, sometimes silence is surrender." And he had surrendered enough. The hearing room was packed. Rows of folding chairs filled with veterans, journalists, law students, and local residents buzzed with restrained anticipation. Some wore uniforms, others carried homemade signs, "Tell the truth, VA," and "Honor the right men." Nathaniel Briggs sat at the front table in a modest gray suit borrowed from a fellow shelter resident. His hands were folded tightly in his lap. Beside him sat Marcus Hale, calmly flipping through a binder of files and affidavits. Across from them, a panel of state officials and VA representatives wore thin smiles and practiced neutrality. But even they could feel it, the tide had shifted. The moment began without fanfare. "This public hearing," announced Chairwoman Douglas, "is to investigate claims of misrepresented military service, denial of rightful medical benefits, and falsified records in the case of Dr. Nathaniel Briggs." The first hour was spent listening to Marcus summarize years of shredded paperwork, delayed appeals, and the suspicious downgrading of Nathaniel's medical diagnosis. Then came the testimonies. Jose Martinez took the stand. "I saw him drag Private Carver out of the kill zone while bullets danced over his head," he said. "Stratton was frozen. Doc Briggs wasn't. That citation's got the wrong damn name on it." The room stirred. Then came Lieutenant Rachel Byers, who served with Briggs in Kandahar. She spoke of how he built a makeshift ore out of sandbags and plastic sheeting, performing field surgeries with a flashlight in his teeth. "He didn't just save lives," she said. "He saved dignity. He made people believe they'd make it out alive." One by one, the forgotten came forward to remember. A nurse. A former corpsman. A man who'd read about the case and realized he owed his leg, and maybe his life, to a doctor he'd never properly thanked. They painted a picture the VA couldn't deny, not just of valor, but of quiet sacrifice. And of institutional neglect. The crowd held its breath when Colonel David Stratton appeared on the witness list. He arrived late, suited and stiff. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. Under oath, he cleared his throat and said, "It's true. I panicked. I didn't order the retreat. I didn't protect my men." A gasp rippled through the room. "I didn't write the citation. I never corrected it. I let them believe I was the hero. Because I was ashamed." He turned toward Nathaniel. "I'm sorry," he said. "You carried the burden I wasn't strong enough to face." Nathaniel met his gaze. He didn't nod. Didn't smile. Just blinked slowly, then looked away. It wasn't about apologies anymore. It was about truth. The hearing adjourned with unanimous agreement. The VA would reinstate Nathaniel's full benefits, grant him retroactive compensation, and formally correct the military records and citation. When the announcement was made, someone in the back began to clap. Then another. And another. The room erupted. But Nathaniel didn't stand. He sat still, eyes glistening, throat too tight to speak. Later, a reporter caught up to him outside. "Do you feel vindicated?" she asked, holding the mic close. "No," he said. "I feel seen." "And what would you say to the people watching?" He paused, the late afternoon sun catching the gray stubble along his jaw. "I served a country that forgot me. But I never stopped believing in the people who hadn't forgotten themselves. The ones who still know the difference between medals and meaning." He turned away, walking slowly down the courthouse steps. Behind him, the cameras clicked. In front of him, the sidewalk stretched forward, not toward glory, but toward something even rarer, peace. 2 months later, the memorial was rededicated. A new bronze plaque had been installed, glinting softly in the spring morning sun. The engraved letters were crisp, unweathered, unafraid. Dr. Nathaniel Briggs. For courage under fire, and truth under pressure. People gathered in silence. There were no parade bands. No fighter jet flyovers. Just veterans, young and old, standing shoulder to shoulder. Some came in wheelchairs. Some in uniform. Many came with eyes full of gratitude. Nathaniel stood off to the side at first, watching the crowd from under the brim of an old army-issued cap. He'd polished his boots the night before. Cleaned them until his hands ached. His suit jacket, now properly tailored, thanks to a local tailor who donated his services, hung neatly across his frame. But his posture, as always, was modest. Unassuming. Kyra Lynn stood nearby, notebook in hand, though she wasn't taking notes. "Not today. You should be at the front," she whispered to him. "I am," he replied, "just not center stage." At the podium, Mayor Carruthers adjusted the microphone. She'd been one of the first to dismiss his arrest weeks ago. But today, her voice trembled with sincerity. "We are here to right a wrong," she began. "A wrong that spanned years. A wrong born of bureaucracy and silence. But one man's courage, both in war and after, has reminded us of what honor truly looks like." She turned toward Nathaniel. "Dr. Briggs," she said. "On behalf of a city that failed to see you, and a system that failed to support you, we say thank you. And welcome home." He didn't expect the applause. He certainly didn't expect the chant. "Doc Briggs. Doc Briggs." He shook his head gently, but his throat closed with emotion. He stepped forward, slowly, like a man learning to walk again. When he reached the podium, the crowd quieted. He didn't read from paper. He didn't clear his throat. He just spoke. "I didn't want a ceremony," he began. "Didn't want my name in bronze. I just wanted to be seen. Like so many of the people standing here today, men and women who gave parts of themselves to something bigger, and came home to find their own country looking the other way." A pause. The wind rustled the flags overhead. "We've come to believe that service ends when the war does. But it doesn't. Not for us. The fight just changes shape." He looked out across the faces, some tear-streaked, some steely. "I kept quiet because I thought silence was duty. But silence," he said, his voice firm, "is what lets injustice thrive." He stepped down. The crowd didn't applaud. Not immediately. They just stood with him, some with hats to their chests, some saluting. Then someone, a teenage boy near the back, shouted, "Welcome home, sir." And it broke the dam. Others echoed the words. Some cheered. One woman in a nurse's uniform placed her fingers to her lips and blew a kiss toward the stage. Later, as the crowd thinned and the ceremony faded into memory, Nathaniel stood alone in front of the plaque. He ran his fingers gently over the new letters. He thought about the shoebox in his closet, now full again. He thought about the men he'd saved, the comrades he'd buried, the decades he'd spent feeling like a ghost in a country he'd once bled for. Now, he felt rooted. A schoolteacher approached with a group of children. She gestured toward him. "That's him," she whispered. A boy, no older than 10, stepped forward. "Sir, were you really in the war?" Nathaniel smiled. "Yes," he said. I was. And after it too. The boy looked confused. But the war's over, right? Nathaniel knelt down, his joints creaking like old hinges. Sometimes, son, he said, the war doesn't end until someone tells the truth.